do we understand that we are both spiritually and psychologically also comprised of the earth? Our imaginations, even our concept of the divine, all come from having emerged out of this incredibly fecund, beautiful planet. Rekindle this relationship that we have with the earth. There is only one true nature, and we are a part of it.
Amid a world unraveling, where chaos drowns out the whispers of our soul, there's a sacred summons echoing us through the wild heart of the earth, beckoning us back to our truest essence. I'm Jason Rigby, your guide on the HDL podcast, and today we heed that call with Mary Reynolds Thompson, the visionary seer behind the Way of the Wild Soul Woman. She unveils 5 divine archetypes, eternal flames of nature's spirit, to lead us each on a holy pilgrimage back to our untamed radiant self. This is no mere talk. It's a celestial awakening, a clarion cry to mend our fractured spirits and a wounded planet. Thank you, Mary, for being on the HDL podcast today.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Jason.
Yes, I want to get into your book. I read it, and it's absolutely amazing. I encourage everyone right now to hop down in the show notes, all our HDL listeners, and purchase the book. We'll have the link in the show notes. You know, in The Way of the Wild Soul Woman, you describe the wild soul story, and it's kind of like a narrative rooted deep within the earth of our being. Without getting into the archetypes, we'll get into that later, but in a macro way, what exactly is a wild soul story?
A wild soul story is a story that is rooted in the recognition that we emerge from the earth. I was very impacted by a writer called Thomas Berry. I don't know if you know him, a cultural theologian. He wrote Dream of the Earth and The Great Work. But one of the things he said that struck me so profoundly was, okay, well, maybe we understand that we are physically of the same stuff as the earth, but do we understand that we are both spiritually and psychologically also comprised of the earth? In other words, our imaginations, even our concept of the divine, all come from having emerged out of this incredibly fecund, beautiful planet. And so a wild soul story recognizes this relationship and kinship and really ancestry, right? Because the earth is our ancestor, and puts it at the core of who we are.
Do you feel like, because you broke it up and it's always beautiful for us, to be able to understand the archetypes. And like I said, we'll get into those 5 archetypes. But you write that the wild soul story bridges kind of this false divide between outer and inner nature, earth and soul. How does that look? Especially because we're talking to women today, your book's, for women. But how does that look as a woman and the earth and soul? How has a woman lost that connection?
Well, it's very interesting because women and the earth have really been treated in very similar ways. They've been subjugated. They've been raped, pillaged, silenced, ignored. And this all happened really during a period where patriarchy was rooting deep in our system. So if women are going to reclaim their power and their voices and their creativity and their contributions, then we have to move outside of this patriarchal cage we find ourselves in and actually rekindle this relationship that we have with the earth, because actually women held that knowledge. They were the ones who were the herbalists and the midwives and the healers and all of these things. And it's innate in us. And also our bodies, our rhythms, our menstrual cycles, pregnancies when we fill with, ancient seas of amniotic fluid. All of this shows us how primal and primary our connection to the earth is. So without that understanding that we actually are nature, I say bridging the false divide, there is only one true nature and we are a part of it. But in order for people to more easily perhaps comprehend that, I talk about a bridge. And the destruction of that bridge is heartbreaking for men and for women.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to go back to what you said because it's so true. Nature and women have been treated the same, especially now in this. Well, I mean, for thousands of years, maybe even so, you had this kind of male patriarchal system that was at play. But when you read a lot of ancient writings or ancient teachings, like you were saying, there was a lot of tribes where the women were the leaders. They were the ones that were, the wisdom, the older. And I always tease, like, an old guy was nothing. If you're in a tribe, you can't reproduce, you're going to hurt yourself. You can't go fast hunting. So there's no use for an old guy, but a senior woman, an elder, she was that wisdom, and they would look. I mean, even Alexander the Great went to the oracles, and over and over again, you can see these stories. Where do you think, because here's my thing. It's like, if we have this feminine power, in this world, and why did we lose that? Why is the feminine psyche so fragile and breakable?
So I actually don't think that the feminine psyche is fragile and breakable. I think it is powerful, resilient. It's been battered and bashed and ignored, and all of these things have happened to it, but it's still strong within us. So I would say that it's unbelievably resilient. But I think the truth of it was, think about it this way. We get to a point in sort of the 16th, 17th centuries where science is taking over. And this kind of mental attitude, I think, therefore I am, and this understanding that they want to extract everything they can from the earth. Well, if you do that, you can't think of the earth as sentient, as having feeling or being related to you. The same, because women were so associated with the Mother Earth, you have to diminish the feminine too. Because the feminine is so strongly associated with the earth that if you don't diminish the feminine, you actually don't have it in you to treat the earth in such a cruel and extractive way. So it was this joint thing that went on, and it was deeply intentional. And of course, sadly, as we're seeing, persists to this day.
Yeah. And I want to, because I think this is perfect to kind of start with chapter 1 in the Desert Woman.
Yeah.
And that archetype, in this barren world, it's kind of the first initiation. And, for me, when I was reading it, and I can't, I could kind of relate, but not really, because I'm a white male, typical. But, it was kind of the challenge seemed to be kind of knowing you are enough.
Yeah.
And then, the core elements were like knowing you are enough and then releasing the old. Can you get into this desert woman, the barren world?
Yes, I can. I also do want to mention that I have a book called Reclaiming the Wild Soul, which has the earth archetypes that are both for men and women. But this book came out of a course that I taught for women from around the world. So I began to get really curious about how these earth archetypes could be embodied by the feminine. The beginning of any Shiro's journey, right, is separation. If you're entangled in the quotidian life with all of its demands and all of the things that pull at you and push at you, it's really hard to take a journey of transformation. So Desert Woman and Her Barren Worlds is this invitation to step into solitude and silence and come to know the truth of yourself in the bones. And for women particularly who have been trained to feel their own worth through other people's opinion of them, it is a vital component. And the shedding is the shedding for women most particularly out of all the things they think they should be and do. This sense of obligation to everybody else but themselves, because that's how they're being taught to value themselves. And so Desert Woman and a desert, as you know, it's not a people-pleasing kind of landscape, but it's incredibly beautiful. And there's a lot of life that exists there, but it's subtle. And so it's dry. It can't overdo. So it's this deep, deep message to women to say, to start your journey, You just
Do you
go,
feel
shh.
like, yeah, do you feel like with the barrenness, or the countercultural idea of stillness, what does that look like, kind of more in a specific way for a modern woman today?
Barrenness, how does it look for a modern
Yeah,
woman?
like how does it like because you're almost it's like some people would say, especially new seekers that are listening, it's like, well, this is kind of opposite of what, they may think this could kind of be the opposite of what the feminine movement has said, which is to be louder, stronger, take over things, more masculine. You kind of see that rooted in it. And then that trauma and anger and, like you said, all of that trauma has to be brought through. So how does this barrenness, this non-doing, this counterculture idea of stillness, how does that create power or that seems so counterintuitive.
Yeah, it is counterintuitive because we think of power as doing, right? The more we do, excuse me, I have allergies, the more powerful we are. So barrenness in this completely overdoing culture is an act of resistance and rebellion. And it's saying, I, as a woman, refuse to only be known and seen as this fecund, fertile, pretty, flourishing, I'll be nice, I'll give you things, doing kind of person. And we see so many women, particularly suffering from diseases that are related to chronic fatigue and immune disorders, and they are just trying to push through. I realize that a lot of women will say, well, I've got to work, I've got kids to raise, I've got this. Absolutely true. So you don't have to do it all at once. You have to do it in these pockets. I mean, you can be washing dishes and making, a meditation out of it. You can find the stillness in little points and places. You don't have to leave your family behind and go into the desert, though some women do.
Right.
But you don't have to. But what you have to do is dissociate your value from doing and say, it's okay for me to be barren. Yeah.
That's so good. That's like that's I hope we have tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of women hear that because that's so important. The next one is the Forest Woman, number 2, the spiral path of transformation. And I was reading this, it's funny because like your book, and you said you have another book for men and women, but it was kind of touching me at the same time.
Yeah.
This spiral path of linear journeys that we're often taught to expect. Why do you think this spiral approach more aligns with the wild soul woman's growth? Like when you're talking about a spiral path, what was your idea when you were writing that? What were you meaning?
What I was meaning is that we live in a very goal-focused culture. So I'm going to go from A to Z like this, and I'm just going to look this way. And I've been told that the path of my life is to do this, get this education, this kind of relationship, this kind of home, blah. And so you're just on this linear track, and that's very much the masculine path.
Yes, right.
But, what I loved was discovering that the root of the word ambition is from the Latin ambere, which means to go around, is to circle. So when you live the spiral path, you are being motivated by something other than goals that are often imposed on you by the culture or your family or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you are being much more instinctive and curious and feral even in your way of navigating the world, so that you are in a process of discovery. You don't think you know it all, which is the linear, but you're in this willingness to be surprised, opened up to, changed by, and to feel it in your body. Does this feel right? Is this the path that feels right for me now? And so it is this way. You're never going to discover something wild and unexpected on a freeway. You have to take the back roads to discover the magic. And I think that's really the spiral path.
I love that, and the theme for Forest Woman is the dark womb, the initiation. And it's the stage of gestation and mystery, where one nurtures new dreams in darkness and cocooning. And I like that. I like, because you talk about the challenge rising from the ashes, and you mentioned, the tree planting movement. I can't pronounce the person's name,
Yes.
but breathing with the trees. But
Right.
this is so important. Can you get into this gestation and mystery?
Yes.
I know you just talked about it with the freeway a little bit, but in following the spiritual path of growth, like, what does that look like? Like, if there's a woman right now, Mary, that's like, pardon my French, but she's like, fuck my life. This is crazy. I can't handle this anymore. I've got mental health issues. Like you said, my hormones are out of whack, everything. And I just want to take off and do this. Is this the dark womb? Is this that gestation and mystery, the first path to following the spiral path?
Well, it's really interesting. I would say what you just iterated was the desert woman. It's like, I got to get away. This is awful. Blah, blah.
Right.
And what's interesting is that for many of us, we do, the term spiritual bypass, which of course you do know, is that we tend to, so we'd go to desert woman because things aren't working and I'm feeling a little crazed with everything in my life. And then we just want to go on to the new life, right? And forest woman says, no, stop now. Go into the darkness, into the mystery. Pay attention to your dreams, nurture those new sprigs. Because the truth is, if you go from desert woman to our end one, which I won't name yet, without pause, you haven't built up an inner strength.
Right.
You don't have that sap and flexibility and deep, deep knowing. And so it's really that curiosity, that willingness to be led and guided to something deeper and truer about your life. And it is in that dark womb place. And it means you don't manifest up here. It's not about manifestation. It's about rooting deep, deep, deep in the truth of your own soul.
Would you call that like shadow work, like, finding out the trauma that's in you and working that out, understanding, truly who you are? What is that longing that you have?
Yes, I think.
Would that be this period?
Well, I think shadow work exists in all of them. Archetypes always have a shadow side, and so the shadow side for the forest woman would be to be constantly wondering and never get out of the forest. A lot of very creative people go from one idea to another idea to another idea and actually never move on in the journey to manifest. And that can be very soul injuring because you have this deep longing in your heart actually to bring something forth, but then there's another path. I'll go over there. But all of the work contains this deep shadow work, this willingness to look deeply into who we are, the good, the bad, the ugly, and just the reality, and to hold it all with compassion and gentleness, because we are just, stumbling on the path together, folks,
Yeah, it's amazing. And it leads us right into the ocean and river woman, surrendering to emotional depths. And this brought up a lot for me, personally. I really enjoyed, to me, this one was kind of the one that really stuck out. But ocean and river woman calls us to go to the limits of our longing, because there's so many times, I love the word longing, because there's so many times we don't take the time to understand that. Like, whether it's a calling or a longing or whatever it is. And you see, like, in the Bible or lots of the hero's journeys, like you talked about, there's this calling that, okay, and then comes the longing. And it's like, no matter what, I have to do this, and I know, a lot of us, we embrace even these, messy emotions that we have with this. But why is this surrender essential? And talk a little bit about ocean and river woman.
Yeah, ocean and river woman, if we've got the barren worlds of desert woman and the dark womb of forest woman, she's the breaking waters, literally. So you can see it's a rebirthing journey. And it's that moment when that the longing has built up in you in such a way that it's strong enough to break down the dams that hold us back. And those dams, you talked about trauma, are comprised of traumas and messages and cruelties and shamings that have held us back and silenced us. And longing is so different from wanting. To me, longing has this deep spiritual soul purpose to us. When we really long for something, it's a connection to our soul purpose. It's telling us something. And so often we literally ignore those feelings. We culvert them. We put them underground. We're afraid of them because we're afraid to let go. We don't trust. We surrendering. I know personally, surrendering is one of the toughest things that I do because I grew up in a household that wasn't particularly safe. And so I learned to trust myself, but I didn't learn to trust anything other than myself. So to have faith in the longing, and by the way, you will make mistakes because, I use the metaphor of the mainstream. It's easy to be carried by the mainstream desires, which are superficial and polluted and all of these things. And oftentimes we have to go back to the source, to even look at what brought us alive as children. What brings us alive now? When do we feel most energized? What is beautiful to us? And to keep being curious and allowing that to build up in us until we begin to feel that we can trust, yes, this holds the key to my soul purpose. I can.
Yeah, Mary, this is heavy. This is that transformative power of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And, as a man, it's really hard. I couldn't imagine with all the trauma and, the thousands of years of drama and trauma that's been happening, to the feminine psyche. I can't imagine what that would be like because it's overwhelming to me, to understand surrender. That's not what you do. You fight through it,
Right.
You work through it. But one of the things I had to learn, with the I'm not good enough is who put the expectations on the I'm not good enough. And then what list do I have? Oh, okay. Well, that's some, like you said, puritanical 19th century list that my grandparents taught me. You know what I mean? So, well, I can strike that off because that's not real, especially to me.
Right.
How can we trust the emotional current, especially with this vulnerability when it feels so overwhelming?
So it is. I think water can destroy as well as support. And I think it behooves each of us to approach this in a way that feels right and nurturing to us. So oftentimes when we finally surrender, a lot of rage and misery and anger and all kinds of things come out of us, despair and so on and so forth. And that can kind of flood our entire ecosystem of relationships, right? And maybe that has to happen. But also you can take down the dam one brick at a time. And you can do it gently. And you can just, begin with the small things, just like with Desert Woman, little pockets of silence and time. You can begin with saying, I really love to do that. Even though nobody's supporting me in doing that, I'm going to make time to do that. And that's one little way. But our emotions are tricky and we have to become emotionally literate. And we haven't taught to be that way. So you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do belly flops and you're going to feel like you're drowning at times and all kinds of things are going to happen. So this isn't a perfect journey, but it's not about becoming perfect either. So the thing is to explore and to hold yourself gently and know that Ocean and River Woman holds you gently. All of these ancestors have your back. And we're in this together and we're learning together. And emotions, you got to go play in that place for quite a while before you begin to really discern and learn the difference between envy and rage and jealousy and love and all of these things, right?
Yeah, and experiencing all that leads to Mountain Woman. It's birthing the new. Mountain Woman is about manifesting our inner knowing, often requiring, once again, we're talking about sacrifice. What does this archetype demand we let go of? And how does it support us in taking bold action? Because, being bold from an feminine side, I've got the masculine side. I know what bold means. We often look at heroic stories of war and things like that, from our side. But what does taking bold action look like? And how do we let go of this?
So one of the things I think as you embody Mountain Woman is, particularly for women, is that we've been the peacemakers, right? Our desire is to quell everything down, to keep it calm, to keep it, well, mountains weren't formed from a calm place. There's a lot of volatility, huge eruptions and collisions and all of these things. So to be unafraid of conflict, to be unafraid of chaos, to be unafraid of sometimes, back to Ocean River Woman, those feelings that erupt, and know that we're not there just to keep everybody tamped down and happy and make it nice, because stuff has to emerge. Right. So that's the biggest letting go. The second thing is the willingness to be vulnerable, because mountains are visible. You're taking a stand. You're rising above the landscape. And when you are visible, particularly as a woman, and particularly a woman of color, you become an object for everything, every hateful, slam you down thing that there is. So much of Mountain Woman is about getting to know those deep sort of bedrock values that you are building your life on. And if you've got your bedrock values down, then you know that you can start manifesting from that place, because there is such a solid foundation for what you're doing.
So it's kind of a bridge from inner growth to outer impact.
Yeah, brilliantly said. It really is. And I think if, separation is very much Desert Woman and Forest Woman, and then we get into the ordeal, which is much more it's visible to people around us, Ocean and River Woman, and Mountain Woman. It's like, oh, what's Jason up to? What's he doing? Right? Because it becomes noticeable. And
no, I love that. Grassland Woman, it's kind of, it focuses on nurturing new life, reintegrating with community. What challenges arise when stepping back into the world, when you're going through a journey? And this is a thing that I've had problems with, personally, is it's so much, I've gotten so good at, I have a partner and all that, and she's amazing, gives me my space, but I've gotten so introverted in the spiritual aspect of things that I have to know, that, that works. That's easy when it's just you hanging out, reading books, but it doesn't, but you need the triggers. You need the community. You need all these things, how do you, after going through all that and nurturing this new life and taking bold action and it's me, how do we step back into the world?
Well, this is the hardest part of any transformational journey, the return, right? That we've had these incredible experiences. We've done these amazing things. We feel deeply changed, and we believe that we have sacred medicine for our community. And then we go back to our community, and the community looks at the sacred medicine and goes, I just speak for my own experience, is that for me, with my wild soul work, it took years. It took years of just showing up. People called me woo-woo. People dismissed me. I can go to these networking events and you could just see people wanting to rush for the hills, right? So, why aren't I offering practical, materialistic benefits in a bullet point presentation, But I kept showing up and I kept doing. And for me, I kept writing. And finally, the community that I needed to have grew. So I would say there's a lot of patience needed in nurturing, and a lot of willingness to know that when you're in community, you don't have to love everybody in the community, and they don't all have to love you. We're so, in our little echo chambers where, this is part of why we're in such trouble in this world, is we haven't learned the art to hold on to each other even when we disagree with each other. And so this is the real soul growing. And a lot of indigenous communities believe that you cannot fulfill your purpose unless the community helps to draw it out of you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's so good. And, you talk about like wisdom, playfully and passionately, healing. What does a Grassland Woman look like coming into community and healing?
You have this sacred medicine. I believe as a rewilded soul with increasing creativity, courage, earth connection, you have gifts to offer, your own particular ones. As unique, as weird, as quirky, the better, because nature loves diversity, right? And I think Grassland Woman is that warm lap that is there with you, that says, okay, it feels a little odd right now, and you're uncomfortable and you're afraid and you feel lonely, because loneliness can really come up at this point when you've had a transformation. But I'm here with you, and together we're going to nurture those seeds, and together we're going to trust again that they will take root when you find the right place. You've got to find your peeps.
I love that. And Mary, we're coming up on the hour. We're going to have you back for part 2. And this is perfect because we went through the archetypes. So now what I want to have you back for in part 2 is I want to extensively go through chapter 6 so that everyone, especially here in the Western world, we love, how do we do this? What's the right things to do? What's the daily, so chapter 6 is walking the way of the Wild Soul Woman. And it's basically integration and what that ongoing journey looks like through altars, season originals, recognizing desires. We're going to get into shadow work, planetary impact. So, I think this is awesome, but I want to leave readers. One, I know you have the book. You have an amazing website. Whoever designed your website, did you do that? Did you have somebody?
No, I had the most divine, wonderful, brilliant Emmy from Peru who did it. Yeah.
Yeah. I need her contact.
Yeah, you can. I'd be happy to offer it. Happy to offer it.
I would love to be able to get our website's really, really good, but yours was amazing. And so I want people to know Wild Soul Sisters, what's going on, what are you offering, and the website address. Of course, everybody's going to go buy your book right now. And I want everybody to read it before we go to the next, episode. But can you talk a little bit about what you have going on through your website?
Yeah, I have a lot of poetry and writing prompts, so I hope people will look at those interviews with people. I'm about to do a course on poetry that's coming up. I do a lot of online teaching now, and especially through an organization called the Tricky Trust, which trains ecotherapists. So I hope that people will find me there. And it's just a full-bodied workshop. You can find out about all my books there. You can download, which is really fun, my 5 Earth meditations. So please feel free to do that. Yeah, come explore, and feel free always to email me with questions.
Yeah, I love that. That we'll make sure we put the links for that for the meditations, because we always practice different types of meditations here on HDL. So that's awesome, Mary. It was an absolute honor and a privilege. I hope to have you back for part 2.
Fabulous.
Walking the way of the Wild Soul Woman. I would love to be able to go through that with you.
Thank you, Jason, so much. It's been a joy.